Hi, everyone. Welcome. So happy to see you here today. I'm Sarah Guernsey, Deputy Director and Senior Vice President for Curatorial Affairs here at the Art Institute. And I wanted to first remind everyone to silence your phones if possible. And I'm thrilled to welcome you today to our program celebrating Remedios Varo, Science Fictions. This is the first museum exhibition dedicated to the Spanish-Mexican Surrealist artist in the United States in over 20 years. Featuring more than 60 of Varo's paintings, drawings, sketchbooks, and objects made between 1955 until her death in 1963, this exhibition considers the artist's practice of combining science, alchemy, magic, and mysticism with surrealist automatic techniques. Exhibitions like this are at the center of our program to present artworks across time, cultures, identities, and geographies. We hope that today's conversation will deepen your engagement with Varo's work when you visit the galleries on the second floor of the Modern Wing. I don't know if many of you have seen it yet, but hoping you'll head right up and see it. So today you'll hear from the two co-curators of the exhibition. We have Caitlin Haskell, our Gary C. and Frances Comer Curator of Modern Art here at the Art Institute of Chicago. She's overseen the collection of modern art since 2018. And I'm sure you've probably seen her exhibitions of recent years. She did Ray Johnson in 2021, Cezanne in 2022, and most recently, Salvador Dali, The Image Disappears in 2023. She's been busy. Joining Caitlin in conversation today is Tere Arcq, an independent curator and art historian. Formerly chief curator of the Museo de Arte Moderno in Mexico City, Tere specializes in the work of women surrealists in Mexico, with a particular focus on Leonora Carrington, Alice Raon, and of course, Remedios Varo. Today, we welcome you to the Art Institute. We're so happy to have you here and deeply honored to have you share your insights with this audience. Before their conversation begins, I'm very honored to acknowledge our other very special speaker today. Natalia Pollock is the director of the Museo de Arte Moderno in Mexico City, and she's going to come up and speak right now. So please join me in welcoming Natalia.
Thank you, Sarah. On behalf of the Secretary Culture of Mexico and the National Institute of Fine Arts and Literature, I would like to express our gratitude for the magnitude of this exhibition, which is the result of deep and committed research led by curators Caitlin Haskell and Tere Arcq. The fact that the exhibition is the outcome of more than 2 years of collaboration with the Art Institute of Chicago speaks to its significance and relevance. It is thrilling to know that the exhibition not only explores the themes and symbolism of Remedios Varo work throughout her life, but also provides a detailed investigation into the techniques she used to create her paintings, enriching the understanding and appreciation of her work. The collaboration with the Art Institute of Chicago not only allowed for an extraordinary selection of works, including some of her most iconic and visionary paintings, but also forest connections and dialogues between both museums. This is a wonderful example of how art can unite and strengthen friendshipness across countries. I want to express my gratitude to James Rondeau, director of the Art Institute of Chicago, for his interest in bringing this exhibition to fruition and recognizing the unique character of Remedios Varo's work and her narratives. Congratulations to all individuals who worked tirelessly to make this exhibition possible, and to the teams for their respect, commitment, and collaborative spirit. Undoubtedly, Remedios Varo science fiction will be an unforgettable and enriching experience for all the visitors to the museum. May the exhibition be a great success and continue to generate cultural ties, trust between Mexico and the United States. Muchas gracias y felicidades.
Okay, it's so nice to see everybody. Thank you, Sarah and Natalia, for your remarks, and really thanks to everyone for sharing your afternoon with us and with Remedios Varo. This is an excellent turnout for a beautiful Saturday afternoon in July. We'll have about 45 minutes speaking to you about the exhibition Remedios Varo Science Fictions, the culmination of a 2-year collaboration between Tere and me, and a really pretty extensive team of art historians and conservators, a number of whom are here with us, as well as lenders and sponsors. We're very excited to be able to talk to you about works in the exhibition. As Sarah mentioned, there are 60 works in the show that include paintings, drawings, sculptural objects, even a little bit of fiction writing, some science fiction. And of those 60 works, more than half of them are being presented in the US for the first time. And because this is Varo's first museum exhibition in the United States in more than 20 years, we know that many of the visitors to the exhibition will be encountering Varo's works in person for the first time ever, which is really exciting for us. May I ask if it's possible to have a show of hands? Has anyone seen the exhibition? We just opened at 10 o'clock. Okay, already many people, many hands held high. That's excellent. We'll include some of the installation photography of the show, and with the image that you see here, you can tell that this lilac and lavender combination figures throughout the galleries. Neither Tere nor I ever thought that we would do a show with lilac-colored walls, but there's something a little bit mystical about purple and Varo, and it seems to be working well together. So the way that we've presented the artworks in the exhibition, we hope that you will be able to spend time with these works because they truly reward the act of looking. Many of Varo's works require quite a bit of time to reveal what they're about. They don't disclose all of their meaning immediately, and they certainly don't indicate on their surface how the making and the story connect to each other. And that really has been what Tere and I have been focused on. You'll often hear us talking together about the dual mysteries of Varo's work, and that is an indication that there's some esoteric source matter from which she's drawing, and we'll be talking to you about that. But there's also a truly singular approach to making a picture. And our project over the past 2 years has been to think about how those two aspects, the storytelling and the making, come together. And so we thought that we would begin by actually looking together at one of Varo's works, El Flautista from 1955. 1955 is the year at which the exhibition begins. This is not a full career retrospective by any means. It's just looking at 8 years from 55 until Varo's death in 1963. And so yes, we are not really looking at an evolution or tracing sort of a path through her career. We're looking at these final 8 years where her work really comes into its own, and I think where both of us believe that her most significant contribution to 20th century painting takes place. So what are some things that we might notice about this painting, which comes to us from our partners at MOM? It's a work to me that looks like it might be centuries old at first. It also looks rather futuristic. There are also some very dramatic shifts in scale that take place in the work, from these tiny indications of vapor or dust to vast landscapes and even cosmic-looking expanses. Varo's using a few different techniques to help visualize things, and she's trying to visualize things that cannot be seen. So you'll notice that there's a musician there called a flutist, but who's playing a recorder. The sounds coming out of the recorder are visualized with very fine scratches into the surface of the painting, which we'll talk about. These are paintings that are made, a few of the paintings are made on canvas, but most of them are made on hardboard or masonite that has many, many, many layers of gesso applied to the surface and then sanded down. So it's basically like painting in oil on plaster, if you will. And so in addition to showing sort of the invisible qualities of music and making that visualized, she's also showing us this octagonal tower on the left, which is partially constructed from this masonry of fossils that are falling into place. But we also have an outline of that tower that has been incised into the surface of the painting and is helping us to see what's moving forward, what this tower will become. So there are parts of the painting that are very precisely planned and clearly indicating narrative content here. And there are also passages of media that are frankly too raw to be put into words yet. It's as if the artist's hand hasn't formed them into something. They're still in the process of coming into being themselves, which gives us the sense of the mysteriousness of matter still and its metaphysical potential. Varo's pictures, as you'll see as we go through the exhibition, do something that I think is truly unique and singular, which is that they place the figural right up against the literal or the actual, and then they allow those two different types of visual information to suffuse each other, to intermingle, to contaminate each other, and they allow you to start making the story that connects them, if you will. So what I've described are some of the hallmarks of Varo's paintings that you'll see throughout the show. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tere to talk to us specifically about the content of the Flutist.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. And as Caitlin was mentioning, this is a very special work. This was painted in 1955 and exhibited in her first show in Mexico City. And this is the day that marks the beginning of the exhibition, when she started painting this. And we will go into a little bit of what she was doing before in a few minutes. But this painting is so important in terms of telling us everything she was doing. We have the sophistication of the technique that Caitlin just described. It also has the mother of pearl inside. The face of the flutist is made of mother of pearl, which the meaning of this is that this was a person that achieved spiritual enlightenment, which was one of Remedios' major preoccupations. She was looking for transcendence, and that influenced her studies, her readings of different spiritual traditions. Most particularly in the case of this painting, she was very into the study of the evolution of consciousness, especially as proposed by two mystics, the Russian Uspensky and the Armenian Russian Gurdjieff, whose followers were based in Mexico in the 1940s, among many other groups. And one of their proposals was based on the idea, specifically Gurdjieff, that everything in the universe is built out of vibrations. And he talked about the law of the octaves, and that is why Remedios uses also these octagonal buildings in many of her paintings. So this figure is using the vibration of music to build this tower that had to do with the evolution of humanity from the fossils you see engraved in the stones towards the sky. And it was influenced by a real building that was under construction from these groups in Mexico that that was meant to be an observatory to tie the history of humanity as well. So she is putting together among this experimentation on materiality and the cosmos, these ideas of spirituality and transformation, of the universe and the human being. And you will see that most of the paintings have a protagonist. It's one figure, which in many cases is a symbolic self-portrait, and it was Varo herself in her search to understand the mysteries of the universe. And when we talk about the dual mystery, is that in this exhibition and in the catalog, and that is why we chose this image to be the cover, is the mystery of how the paintings were created, and also the mystery of what she's trying to tell us underneath. What's the story?
Great, and that's terrific, Tere. And we're going to just go a little bit deeper into those dual mysteries that we've referred to. So on the one hand, the mystery of the subject matter, and in this composite of 6 artworks that you'll see in the exhibition, you begin to get a sense of Varo's interest in astronomy, space travel, visualizations of the cosmos, alchemy, psychoanalysis, astronomy, hybrid human and animal creatures, mechanics, simple mechanics and complex vessels. Tarot, for sure.
Sacred geometry.
Absolutely. Spaces of creation. And we'll be talking about each of these works and those subjects. But then there's also the mystery of how Varo creates a picture. As I mentioned, she was working primarily on hardboard or masonite, on the smooth side of it. She would prepare it with a very thick coat of gesso, which she would then sand down when it was wet and it was dry. And then she's working on that surface in oil paint. And what you'll see in the exhibition when you get up close to the works, not getting closer than 18 inches, but getting very close to the works, you'll notice that some of the white of the gesso comes through and gives the paintings a very matte quality when you're looking at them. And that was achieved by making very fine incisions into the gesso before she started painting, and then putting down the oil paint, and then afterwards going in, of course, painting with brushes, sometimes with brushes with just a single hair, and you'll see in our vitrines we have 2 of Varo's paintbrushes on display. But in addition to using paintbrushes to create fine lines, she would also use a stylus to make incisions into the surfaces of the work, to make impressions that get back into that layer of gesso. And through interviews and also some experimentation in our conservation lab, we believe that she was using potentially some crystals to create the first layer of scratches, and we'll show you some pictures of Varo's crystals, which are on view in the exhibition and also shown on her easel when she was working, but also to make that second type of very precise line. We tested some needles, but we actually think that she was using a household ice pick to make those incisions.
Well, that was suggested by her godson,
yes,
who was practicing with her. It was the only person allowed in her studio when he was a kid.
Mm-hmm. And so because we've been equally interested in both sides of the dual mysteries, in the exhibition catalog, we collaborated with Katrina Rush and Mary Broadway, respectively a paintings conservator and paper conservator, who actually traveled to Mexico City and looked at all of the artworks with us in, when was that, February of 22. They worked with us to create a taxonomy of techniques. And in the catalog, you will see 23 different processes from inlay, sgraffito, smudging, scoring, squaring, stippling, textured gesso. And so these are techniques that many different artists use, but that Varo was relatively unique in bringing together, sort of using so many of them in a single composition. And we like that this contribution really centers Varo. It's no longer just Max Ernst or Oscar Dominguez that we're going to be talking about for their use of decalcomania, but Varo is doing all of these things too and is really pioneering them.
Yes, and in a very sophisticated way. May you go back a couple of slices where we have Starcatcher?
Oh.
So we will see Caitlin describe very well how the process of the most of the oil paintings was done and how we experimented in the labs with the conservators. But you will also see examples of works on paper that show also the variety of techniques and how she was combining this sophistication in technique with the meaning, the imagination, but also what she was looking at the level, for instance, of astronomical discoveries and the science journals she was looking at. For instance, in the very first image you see, which is Cazadora de Astros, she's using the technique of the calcomania, but the effect she creates with the ink and the wash as she folded the paper and open it again, it reflects the image of a supernova being created. So it was pretty obvious that she was looking at science as well, and how she was able to mix this chance with science. It makes it rather unique in terms of surrealism in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Tere is beginning to speak to is this type of intertextuality in Varo's work, right? It's never exclusively an interest in astronomy or exclusively an interest in fantasy writing or psychology. There's a sense that as Varo is actually a very structural thinker, and that there might be analogies that are active in maybe one field of science or maybe a field of esoteric knowledge, that if you bring them together, they'll be mutually illuminating. And that also comes out in the way that she uses all of these techniques together.
Exactly.
Too. Okay, so let's go forward. Where are we? So in the exhibition catalog, we wrote with a team of contributors 17 essays on artworks in the exhibition that are really our emphasis was on bringing people to Varo's paintings themselves, helping people look closely, helping them to contend with these dual mysteries, but getting away from Varo's biography a little bit and helping us look at the works themselves in a new way. But we also know that people don't really have a great sense of Varo's background and biography. So Tere is going to very quickly take us through some of the high points of Varo's life from 1908 to 1963. And I'll give you the clicker if you'd like as you're going through that.
Thank you. Well, it's going to be very quick, and you can read this chronology that we have in the catalog, that it's beautifully published here. So just to get a sense of who she was born in 1908 in Gerona, Angles, a little town in Gerona in Spain. And her background is very interesting because you will see how that reflects in her painting. Her mother was from a very Catholic family, so this spiritual vein in her came to her mother's side in a way to study Catholicism and the life of the saints, going to a nun school. But on the other hand, her father was an hydraulical engineer, and he taught her how to draw, and he was designing all these mechanisms for textile mills and how to navigate through the waters, and they traveled to Morocco and other places in Spain. So he was a believer in Esperanto, in having a universal language. He was very open, giving her science fiction books, everything that will influence her work in the future. And he is also the one that believed in her to become an artist, which was not usual in Spain for a little girl. So he allowed her to then go to the Academia de Bellas Artes in San Fernando, where Dalí studied, where Garcia Lorca studied, other famous people, artists that we know, attended. So she had a very formal academic training in painting. Right after, she wanted to leave Spain and go to Paris, where all the avant-garde was getting together. So she gets married to a school friend, and they go together to Paris. They couldn't survive, unfortunately, so they go back to Spain, and they settle in Barcelona, where there was this group of artists that were trying to follow the Surrealist, and they were called the logicofobistas. They had a phobia for the logic, and they were trying to subscribe to André Breton's manifesto. So she begins, as part of this group, experimenting with all these Surrealist techniques like exquisite curves, collage, etc. And then Franco comes in, of course, and the day they find out about the assassination of Garcia Lorca, Remedios decides to leave Spain. She had met a little bit before Benjamin Perret, a French poet, surrealist, very, very close to Breton, who had gone back to Paris, and she follows him immediately. And that's how she gets immersed and involved with the Surrealist group in Paris. It was a very brief time where she will meet all of these people. At the time, she was doing very little work, experimenting and trying different Surrealist approaches to her work, but mostly doing some works to survive. And then the war came. And she escaped with Perret to Mexico. They were trying to go to New York, where Breton and others will be there, but unfortunately, Perret had a very bad history with communism, and he was denied a visa. So fortune sent them to Mexico, where she arrived in 1941.
And because we're now sort of making the transition to Varo in Mexico, I thought I would share the one previous time when Remedios Varo was part of the Art Institute's writings and publication and program. This is a photograph that was reproduced in an issue of Museum Studies from 1996. And you can see Varo, just a little bit of her face behind Leonora Carrington. This is a photo from 1946 when Carrington it's her wedding. She's marrying Chiqui Whites. So there's Carrington, and there's Chiqui, and there's Varo right there. And since we've been talking about Perret, there's Benjamin Perret and Gunter Gerzo for good measure. But we now have Varo a little bit more clearly shown, a big smile.
Yes.
I love this picture of her. And so, okay, so back to you. We're in Mexico now.
So this is very important, the picture that you just saw, because she arrives in Mexico and she finds this community of exiles that were escaping the war. It was not only Leonora Carrington that was there. They had met just briefly in Paris. They were not friends at the time. They really become friends in Mexico City, where she marries Chiqui Weiss, a Hungarian photographer. She met Katy Horna, another photographer, Gunter Gerzo, who was Mexican, although from a family from Austria. And then Alice Raon, Wolfgang Palen. There was a whole group of people in Mexico City that built a community. And if you think about what was going on in Mexico City at the time, they were really focused on all the murals and all this painting with a political message. So they were not really welcomed by the Mexican artistic community. So they built a community on their own. And this was very important on how they developed completely different environment. And all these friendships were fundamental for Varo. And what happened at the beginning, as you know, most exiles, they were penniless. They had to find ways to earn a living. And Varo was mainly working on commercial works and commissions to try to bring food to the table. Tere Perret was unable to make a living as a writer or poet, so she was the one taking care of the household. And many of her work at the time was commissioned by the pharmaceutical buyer. She went to, it was exactly at the time when she traveled to Venezuela for a couple of years to finally be able to meet her mother and brother, who was a doctor and was hired to do some investigation on bacteria and microbiology, and she was illustrating their brochures. As you see, this is completely different than what you will see in the exhibition.
Yes.
Although some of the motifs and the architecture that she was exploring will be later in her works, but there's a huge gap. And what was happening with her besides doing commercial work? it was that she was very involved with these esoteric groups in Mexico City that whose followers created workshops for painters to study and practice the evolution of consciousness through art. And there were workshops of prolonged observation of form and color, try to think, looking at a table and think that it was wood, so it was a tree before, and there was organic life there that was coming to life. And those practices were fundamental to really allow her to make that jump.
Right.
And we see what she was doing next.
Yeah.
And so in 1951, she meets Walter Gruen, an Austrian emigre, who established the first shop that was really specialized in classical music in Mexico. And he allowed her, he saw how talented she was and allowed her to forget the commercial work and focus completely on her painting. So she established a studio in the early 50s, and then we go to her first solo show in 55.
Right, and that's where our exhibition begins, and this is in fact the first wall of the exhibition with these two paintings, Roulotte, or the Caravan from 55, and also Discovery from, I believe, the following year, 56 for that one, right? So what's fascinating here, I hope that sense that we were describing initially when we were looking at the Flutist of having some figural elements, some areas that are clearly representational, narrative-driven about story, are right up against something that looks almost like a scientific reaction, a chemical procedure or process has taken place on the surface. There are these crystalline accretions or kind of mineral ores that you see in the sky of Roulotte, these gaseous plains that you'll find in many other works. But at this point, there's really not so much of a connection between those automatic processes and the figural elements, which are so carefully planned. This is probably a good place to talk about how some of these automatic techniques are done. They're made through touch and index, pressing something against a surface and then lifting it off. So, and when you do that as an artist, you can get some facility doing that, but it's always a vision that has never been seen before. It is a material pathway that no one's eyes have traveled. And in the first gallery of the exhibition, that's sort of what we're trying to bring together, is the sense of travel and discovery as something that you can do if you're navigating the world, but also as something that takes place in an artist's studio. And so these are two paintings that we felt did that especially well. We also introduce in the first gallery these protagonists, as Tere described. Very often Varo's paintings have one sort of major figure that we're introduced to, sometimes even a symbolic self-portrait. Would you like to talk about Vagabundo? Or, I mean, you started talking about the Starcatcher, and maybe that would actually be the place to begin. So decalcomania, again, is pressing and then releasing. That can be done with paper. It can be done with another sheet of masonite. It can be done with a leaf. But touching something to the surface of your work and then pulling away. In the Starcatcher, you will see there is sort of perfect bilateral symmetry because the piece of board on which Varo worked was folded with some paint in between, right, to create that symmetry left and right. And then she started to create the figure out of it. I'll let you talk about who she made.
Yes, and it's also, this is what, it's very interesting because she combines this automatic process with a scientific idea, the concept of projecting a supernova, but at the same time with her spiritual vision, because she's representing the moon goddess, Diana, the hunter that is just went and catch the moon that she keeps in this little cage. Yeah. So, and it also has a lot different layers of meaning, because this having the moon trapped was also a concept in these esoteric teachings she was studying. The moon represents the emotion, and it was a way to contain the emotion that would not allow somebody to evolve in their path towards consciousness. So she was including all of these elements together in just one painting.
Yeah. And then in Vagabundo, also a single figure, we have, in our exhibition anyway, the first sort of vehicle that is clothing that one can travel in and with. And sometimes you'll see, here we have a nice sort of wheeled conveyance that the vagabond is traveling by, but you'll also see that they can have sails, they can move through the air. There are many different contraptions that are personalized clothing, a vehicle that allows you to travel through the world.
And in this first section, you will see, as it's titled Discovery, that most of the scenes take place outside or in an in-between space. And then we're going to go to a transition to the spaces of creation
that are more indoors, right? So when we were talking about the Flutist, we were just on the verge of saying that there's a type of alchemy taking place on the surface of this work. And then when we get to this painting, Useless Science or The Alchemist, this is a painting that I start to get very, very excited about, because there really is some alchemy taking place in it. And the painting is, in a sense, performing itself. So we have this figure whose clothing emerges directly out of the tiled floor, who is engaging in a process of distillation. And through that distillation process, we seem to have the creation of the surface of the painting itself. So you move from something that is representational to a passage of marks, material on the surface that don't actually seem to be representing something necessarily. They stand alone as themselves, as one of those chemical processes or crystalline accretions that you have taking place. And I think what's really important about this is that you see a painting that is doing something, right? That is as actual as it is fictive. And the ways that Varo brings those together was really part of what we wanted to bring out in this sense of science fictions in the subtitle of our work.
Absolutely. And what is very interesting is that for this alchemical operation, she's using a spinning wheel, which is an apparatus that is always related to women and storytelling. And something that's important about this painting that we discovered during the research in her notebooks is that she actually named her in a notebook the woman alchemist. So it's always been known as if it was a male or maybe androgynous figure, but we just found out that she intended to call her the woman alchemist. So that changes the meaning completely.
Yes, and you'll see we have 11 of Varo's notebooks on view in the exhibition, including that page where she's talking about it's some accounting, actually, right? It's how much money she was going to be paid for the woman alchemist. Yeah.
For the woman alchemist.
Okay, another place where a fictive image seems to create something actual is in this painting, The Creation of the Birds. And this hybrid owl woman, let's say, is using a prism to take starlight and also collecting starlight through this system of flasks, I would say, to create primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. But the birds that are being created are not simply adhering to the page. They're being created as animals that have agency and can fly away. Right? There is a real bird in the world that seems to be coming off of the page through the creation of the birds. And I guess, Tere, I'll let you maybe talk about how this differs from a more traditional sense of mimetic representation, right? Or maybe this would be where we have it in mimetismo, where we've got a traditional type of artistic and aesthetic experience that's being turned on its head. Varo would like to do something that has more connection to reality itself, that's not simply about aesthetics, but is about something that is actually going to have efficacy in the world. And you're probably expecting this picture there instead.
Yes, and this is a painting that she entitled Harmony, and it's a synthesis of everything she was thinking about, reading and believing. You see this figure in a studio that looks like a medieval studio that has books in it, has geometrical instruments, has this spirits coming through the wall, birds having their nest in the chairs, alchemical bases. There's
The birds, just showing the birds.
Oh, yes.
And those figures. And the musical staff, one there.
And in the
and
staff,
the bed.
you see this figure is inserting all these different objects, which include crystals, a mandrake root, which is a magical thing, formulas, mathematical formulas of infinitum and the impossible numbers. And everything is, she's trying to say in this painting that not everything is as we see it, not everything is only reason or science, but there's also the inexplicable, the invisible, the metaphysical. Everything is coming together, and she's trying to make sense of that. So this is a painting, she called it also, it was a symbolic self-portrait. So she's looking for understanding the meaning of everything.
Right. And you touched on this a little bit, but in this section of the exhibition, we're trying to go back to a point in time where the questions that scientists were trying to resolve, in a studiola were not so different from those that artists were trying to solve in the creation of artworks also. I'm going to jump ahead because we don't have so much time left, but one of the aspects, the major sort of structure within the exhibition that we created is this octagonal space where we're trying to offer some insights into Varo's working practice. So we've already spoken about the fact that psychoanalysis, and we have Woman Leaving the Psychoanalyst, a fantastic painting on the left. We also have a sense of, embodiment and sort of eroticism in To Be Reborn. Both of those are on the exterior of the octagon, and as you can see, there are octagonal spaces depicted in those works also. But inside the octagon, we're bringing you into Varo's working practice through a selection of her drawings, her cartoons, working drawings. Also, her notebooks and her crystals and her paintbrushes will be on view there. You can see some of these cartoons there, the creation of the birds that we were just discussing, Nave Astral, spaceship, the rendering of our woman alchemist and the way that the checkerboard floor would become part of the garment that she's wearing. Tere, do you want to talk about these sort of three large-scale cartoons that we have in the octagon?
Yes, I just wanted to say very quickly before that as you will walk in the exhibition, both the colors and the idea of creating this octagon, we were thinking about the experience of the visitor to the show to enter her space, going into this sacred space of creation, her studio, and how she uses the octagon in many paintings because it was a sacred number in geometry for multiple reasons. So we wanted to make the visitor experience that for herself as well. And then go inside this place, and we have these cartoons so you can see the process and how this combination of the various techniques that sometimes are so automatic is always tied to something very scientific, very precise.
Very carefully planned.
She always said that she will not paint anything that was not perfectly imagined in her mind, and she will work in these cartoons, draw it, and then transfer to the surface, usually the Masonite.
You're right. So this might be a helpful distinction. So some of the drawings that you'll see inside the octagon are on sketchbook pages of varying sizes where she's working out an initial idea. But then we have these three works, each on their own wall, that are one-to-one scale cartoons, and they're made on tracing paper, a transfer paper. And so she would work on them, render all of the linear elements and then actually use them, apply them through pressure onto the gessoed surface, almost like using carbon paper to get those linear elements to transfer over into the paintings. And so it's special for us to be able to show these. Sometimes, as in the work on the right, you'll be able to see the final painting. The two compositions on the left are not included in the exhibition, but it gives you a sense of the imagery that she's working with and additional ideas that are contemporaneous with works in the show. As I mentioned, we have 11 sketchbooks. In the middle of this vitrine, you'll see some of Varo's crystals, and we've been pretty obsessed with these crystals, I would say, from noticing them on her easel in this photograph by Kati Orna. And so being able to include those, I think, was pretty special for us.
Well, her partner, Walter Gruen, told me that she had the practice of charging her crystals on the new moon. And for somebody that practices magic, they do that and they use it. It's not only to leave it on the easel. Usually the energy has to be transferred to another surface. So that's why I believe that she used them, and we were able to test and get a pretty similar result in the lab, which was really exciting for everyone.
A few more of those journals. Outside of the octagon, we have several compositions that deal with flight in one way or another. Tere, you spoke already about Walter Gruen. Do you want to talk about the Taurus?
Yes, Taurus is a portrait of Walter Gruen. It's his eyes, and she made that as a birthday gift because he was of the astrological sign of Taurus, but she was also studying the actual shape of the constellation. So this is, again, a mixture of the mystical and the scientific in her work.
Yeah. And then again, this almost Leonardesque depiction of flight, much like in the Flutist with which we began. Here the sounds coming from a hurdy-gurdy are propelling this figure into flight there. We include a wonderful tarot card painted on bone, and also a selection of science fictional literature from Varo's library, and also in the exhibition catalog. We publish the first sort of abridged selection, bibliography from Varo's library, everything that is germane to our topic of science fictions and what she was reading. But I want to make sure that we get to the final section of the exhibition and that there's also time for questions. So when you leave the octagon, you'll begin to see cartoons and finished compositions shown together. So these two actually have never been shown together before. This is the exploration of the sources of the Orinoco River from 1959. And you can see this woman traveler who looks like she's come from the pages of a Jules Verne novel, traveling to the sources, to the source of the Orinoco River, but instead of finding El Dorado, there's an overflowing chalice that is the source of this sort of perpetual, ever-flowing river. We also have in the exhibition an example of Varo practicing some science fiction. This is a work called Homo Rodans, and it consists of a fossil, if you will, on the left that is constructed from chicken, fish, and turkey bones. And it is representing a species that preceded the Homo sapiens and traveled the earth on wheels instead of legs. And Varo actually adopted a fictional persona to write a treatise, sort of a pseudoscientific and very ironic in tone description of the discovery of the Homo Rodans. So that is on view in the exhibition also. But I'd like us to spend maybe just 5 minutes, and we'll wrap up with this, sort of talking about this painting here, The Magician or the Juggler, and then also the triptych on the south wall, which both are stories about the individual and the collective. What's unique about these works is we're no longer thinking about a single protagonist here, although the juggler functions that way a little bit. We're thinking about the ways that the ideas that Varo has been considering have an effect on society, have an effect on the world outside of her pictures. So I'll let you, Tere, if you will, begin with the magician or the juggler and just sort of tell us what we're seeing here, because so many elements are coming together now.
Yes, this is one of her very complex paintings. It's in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is wonderful that now she's been represented.
Yeah, just acquired in 2018.
In major museums. That's a big step. And so there's many different elements she is representing here. On one side, you see all these figures that are all wearing the same kind of clothes. They're tied together as a collective. And she wrote about this. She's referring to these people, it's a mass that it's somehow asleep, because she was referring to all these teachings of Gurdjieff about human beings being in a state of sleep and not really awakened. So there was this whole procedure of becoming an enlightened being, which is the magician. He has transformed, he has evolved. That's why he's also has the mother of pearl inlaid face and a pentagram inscribed in it. And there's lots of elements of animals that represent the four elements, magical plants and elixirs, and even this little box with the face looking at her, which is a representation of the self, the self-observing. And at the same time, it's a representation of the tarot. It is the 22 figures are the arcana, and the magician is, of course, the number one in the major arcana of the tarot. So she is mixing all this knowledge she had to try to talk about the evolution, the transformation, and this magician is able to also control what's happening in the universe. If you see how he's a juggler with the planets flowing from hand to hand.
From hand to hand, yes. And we also have the cartoons for the magician or the juggler displayed in the exhibition too, so you can see them together. But the exhibition concludes with a triptych that was really the most ambitious project of Varo's career. These works were created between 1960 and 61, and it's an example where a single story is told across multiple pictures. These works were exhibited together and at Galleria Juan Martín, and were sold to 3 different collections. And for Tere and me, and for a number of other art historians, bringing them together has been a real quest. And they were brought together recently for the exhibition Surrealism Beyond Borders in New York and in London. And we felt that it was important to have them here in Chicago too. And so thank you to the lenders, and thank you, Tere, for all of your collaboration in helping us reunite this triptych here. The story that we have moving across these paintings is also one of hypnosis. And in the first composition, called Toward the Tower, you'll see that there are sort of young nuns, novitiates, who are riding this bicycle-like contraption. And they are all under the spell of these sort of menacing-looking figures at the front, this Mother Superior, and then a man from whom these birds are flying out and kind of keeping them all under control, except for one girl who cuts her eyes to the side. You can see in the painting that she is not looking forward, hypnotized like the others. She somehow has been able to resist the hypnosis. And the title of this painting, of course, is Toward the Tower. In the second painting in the triptych, we find ourselves looking inside that tower. And the girl who resists hypnosis is in the foreground. She's on the left. She's right here. And what's happening in this tower is something absolutely incredible. They are embroidering the Earth's mantle. They are creating a new earth. From these bolts of cloth in which each of them are embroidering. There's figural imagery that then descends out these slits in the tower, and as it falls to the earth, it becomes the thing that it represents. Much like Varo's practice of having these one-to-one scale drawings for her paintings, these small sketches, if you will, that are embroidered become actualized. They become the size and actually the thing themselves that they are representing. And this clever young girl who's resisting hypnosis realizes that if she wants to escape this tower, the way that she can do that is to embroider herself into the cloth, which she does. And you can see her there on the left, and then her embroidery also, where here you'll see the blue cloth and then brown, and then these two figures together. And the guy and the waiting there. That will lead to the escape. And what's pretty incredible is also to look at the increase in scale that goes across the three paintings too, that she is sort of becoming actualized. It's as if she has fallen from the tower and is moving into a new future. And I think, Tere, I'll let you talk a little bit about this new future, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Yes, there's two things that I like to mention here. First of all, you might be wondering, how do we know this girl is resisting hypnosis? And Varo she sent some photos of her paintings to her brother with a little description detailed on the back. Of course, the brother was a doctor, and it was very much into science. He didn't believe in anything she was studying spiritually or anything else. So she will use some words as clues to say something else that he wouldn't understand, but somebody else would. Mm-hmm. So she describes how these girls are going away from this beehive, and they're escaping the Grandmaster, and only one of them is escaping the hypnosis. The Grandmaster, it's a reference to Gurdjieff, this teacher, and who had the reputation of hypnotizing people around him. So she was interested in his ideas, even though she had no respect for him as a person, but she is using those ideas to talk about, to influence her thinking, and she mixes that with many other things she was studying. What is really interesting about this triptych is at the time, and we know this from papers in her archive, she was deeply concerned about the planet. She was reading science. She was worried about the poles moving and what was happening in the earth, about the ecological disasters. She was very advanced in her thinking. And she was really considering that the possibility of a change in the planet, a new earth, or embroidering a new earth mantle, was a work that should be done through the guide of women, through a female-led spirituality. And we can see that in the idea on how the girls are the protagonists, but also to achieve that, it had to be through the harmony of the genders. If we see in La Huida, the last one, their clothes are fusing on the background, and they become, in a way, one. They become the sails. So they are both moving the boat that is flying towards the cave, and in this gold powder, it's an alchemical transformation. And the cave, it's a symbol in all cultures of being born again, going back to the womb. It's a new beginning. And you see the black sky that is turning into light, as if they're transitioning. And when she was painting this triptych, she was also seriously studying astrology and making charts of the year 1962, which an astrologer and mystical in Mexico was pointing as the year for the era of Aquarius, which was going to be the end of a cycle, the beginning of a new one. And she was deeply influenced by this idea and proposing a new beginning. How can the earth be transformed, and what will be the solution?
Well, thank you, Tere, for leading us through that picture. And I know that we are at time. It's actually a little bit past 3 o'clock. Thank you all for your patience. But if there are questions, we'd be delighted to take them, to continue the conversation. But we also don't want to keep you from the exhibition itself, which is open right now. So thank you all. And We'll let people move to the exits, and then for those who have a little bit more time, we'll continue the conversation. There's a question in the front, and we have a question here. Okay, we have one or two questions, and there's my colleague Miguel will come by with a microphone for you.
Thank you so much. It was really a fascinating discussion. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why Varo is finding an audience, a new audience or a new set of audiences now, and also like how is she thought about within Spain, within Mexico?
Well, I mean, Varo is a hero in Mexico. I mean, here people are seeing her work for the first time, but Tere, maybe you can talk a little bit about her position in Mexico.
Yes, in Mexico, since her first solo show in 1956, all the paintings were sold out within 3 days. And since then, she had a wait list of commissions through her gallery. So she was a celebrity since the beginning, and in Mexico City, her exhibitions have higher attendance than Frida Kahlo, for instance. So she's very, very well known there, and we're hoping that this will be the same scenario here and in other places. And the reason why, I think the values that Varo represent in terms of all her interests are, she was not understood at the time, but they are very contemporary now. All her concerns about the planet, about the place of women, about relationship between genders, about spirituality, looking for alternative ways of understanding the universe, and everything that we now see, for instance, in quantum physics, that is putting together science and spirituality, she believed that already back then. But it was not common. It was something more, hidden, having access to all these teachings. It was not like going online or going to a library. So she was really advanced in that sense. And all this knowledge is now in the air. It's everywhere. And especially young people are really looking for answers that are in other places than previous generations. So yeah. I think Varo speaks to them a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Varo over the past 5 years her recognition has just increased tremendously. We looked at the painting that the Museum of Modern Art acquired, Toledo Museum of Art, who has the Starcatcher painting. They've acquired that. They're letting us show it for the first time. She was included in the most recent Venice Biennale. So there is a kind of a moment that she's having. I feel that it's maybe a few things, and I can speak from my own position. Seeing her work for the first time, it truly is singular in the 20th century. I don't see other paintings that look like this, and there's something that's very magnetic about the way that she works. I also, the stories that she's telling really resonate, in part because they're about belief, and what are the things that you can put your belief in, and how art can embody that. And that's always been a very powerful thing, and I think people are ready to come back to that. These are not just pictures that are working on an aesthetic level, and being able to, invest yourself and see somebody who's really looking at how meaning is constructed and what is her place in the world. That's inspiring. Any other questions? We've got one in the back.
Thank you for bringing this exhibit together. It's going to be extraordinary. I can't wait to get to the gallery. But I wanted to ask a question about her technique of using mother of pearl as a medium for painting a face. in the painting. And so many years ago, I was at the Museum of Women in the Art in Washington. It was a multi-artist exhibit, and I looked across a gallery, and the face seemed to have an inner light.
Yes.
And I just rushed over there and have been totally captivated by that since then. Then many years later, we were in a museum in Mexico City, and I was looking at Spanish colonial Catholic religious paintings, and I saw that there were faces painted on mother of pearl. And so, and that there are several, if not maybe even 5 or 6 of those represented, not the colonial paintings, but hers, that actually have that technique. So
yes.
She obviously used that often.
Yes, absolutely. So in our exhibition, there are 3 paintings that have inlaid mother of pearl to represent the face of a figure. This work here, the Flutist, and Magic Flight. And we were just looking at one yesterday. I mean, particularly in the Flutist. I mean, the phenomenon that you're describing of sort of seeing an inner light in the mother of pearl in its face. It's really incredible. I mean, I almost felt like I was looking at a hologram a little bit in the way that you start to get depth coming out of it. But there's a history to using this material, and it's not just in vice-regal painting. I mean, it's a charged substance, and this is sort of getting to what are the powers of materials themselves, right? And how those can be bodied forth in an artwork. What else? Where are we missing? Is that answering your question, or are there other parts of the question that you'd like us to respond to? Absolutely. She would have seen this in vice-regal painting.
Yes, she must have seen that, of course, and it was used also in colonial painting in Mexico. But also, one of the works she was doing before fully committing to painting, she was decorating furniture in Mexico City. And part of that was using also inlaid mother of pearl in a way where it was used in the 16th century in some furniture in Spain and other countries as well. So she must have learned how to do that when she was working for this Clar Decor decoration house, but then she used it in a completely different way and giving the material a very specific meaning, which was not only decoration.
I think we have our final question down here.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Having grown up in Mexico City and knowing the surrealism that exists in the everyday life of Mexicans, between, you have your own shaman, tarot reading, the markets, etc., etc. How much, or is there any influence of this Mexican surrealism in her work, or did she avoid it and she created her own world?
I'll let you answer that one, Tere.
Absolutely. She was fascinated by that. And she will go with her friends, especially Leonora Carrington and Kathy Horna. They will go to the witches' market and they will visit shamans. Sonora. They went regularly to Sonora Market and they will visit shamans, and they were studying witchcraft and magic seriously. So yes, absolutely. They were like all the surrealists that came to Mexico, and they loved that. Mm-hmm. They could have access to this in a daily basis. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. The exhibition is on view in Gallery 289. We hope you enjoy it, and it will be on view until November the 27th. Thank you.
Thank you.